Pour écouter cette session en français, veuillez cliquer en bas de votre écran sur l'onglet Interprétation et sélectionner le drapeau français.
Hello, bonjour.
Barry Saleho.
On behalf of Éclair Africa,
the African Centre for Cities,
Our Future Cities,
Red Cross Crescent Climate Centre,
and partners,
we're excited to welcome all of you
to the Rise Africa 2022 Action Festival.
Rise Africa has been growing since 2020
as a platform for thinkers,
doers,
and enablers,
committed to inspiring action for sustainable cities.
This year's theme is
creativity.
For me, this means blending skills to be able to communicate the climate change complexity in rapidly urbanizing cities.
We are walking dynamites of creative expression, whether it be in the arts, in the sciences, or in tech.
There are so many people in the African continent who have a huge skill base and are creative in the way they approach challenges.
Creativity in Africa is about embracing our own. It's about dynamism and it's about embracing our indigenous knowledge.
I think agency is finding ways of giving power back to people, to groups, to young people, especially on a continent where it's a very young population.
One should be taking ownership and the responsibility to create an Africa that they would like to live in, as well as leave behind for the future generations.
I think what agency means to me is change from the ground up.
The importance of urgency is the recognition of the past and the recognition that we've lost time.
Urgency is about acting now to build more inclusive, productive, and resilient cities.
Is this need to creatively redesign and unlearn and explore new ways of thinking.
The festival is hosting 33 sessions
with 135 provocateurs
from across Africa and the world.
Every session aims to show new ideas,
showcase ongoing action,
and launch new initiatives, bringing participants together
to chart a new route forward.
We hope that the festival program will inspire you.
At the festival, we encourage you to showcase your business and projects,
build lasting partnerships,
unleash your creative potential,
commit to sustainable action.
Rise Africa is about translating ideas into action. What actions are you going to commit to this festival?
Before the session begins, it is important to note that you're being recorded.
And by participating, you are given the consent to be recorded.
All recordings will be available on the program page after the festival.
Creative expression is vital for creating new futures for our cities.
And so we invite you to enter this session in the spirit of creativity and dreaming.
L'Afrique est fatiguée de se retrouver dans l'obscurité. Elle est fatiguée de naviguer contre les courants de l'industrialisation. L'Afrique me dit qu'elle est fatiguée de se reposer au feu du bois. Il est donc temps de faire sauter les compteurs. Éclairons l'Afrique, libérons son énergie pour libérer son potentiel. Accélérons le rythme cardiaque de son développement. Libérons son énergie pour libérer son potentiel. Transformons l'enveloppe énergétique de l'Afrique pour stimuler son développement. Car la nature nous a tellement gratifiés de ses richesses. Changeons l'histoire, éclairons l'Afrique, donnons un bout de lumière à chaque foyer en Afrique est une possibilité. Changeons l'histoire, éclairons l'Afrique. Libérons son énergie pour libérer son potentiel.
Hello and welcome to this session at the Rise Festival. My name is Colin Webster and I work with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. I've got the pleasure of being the host for the next 45 minutes. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation is a charity based in the UK who aims to help accelerate the transition toward a circular economy. And I'm sure most or maybe all of you understand what a circular economy is, but in a sentence or two, a circular economy is one which is restorative and regenerative by design. So that's the background to me and the foundation that I work with. And I want to share with you a dark secret of mine. And that dark secret is I did something for the first time recently, and a little bit ashamed that it was only the first time. And that was, I set foot on African soil only for the first time 2 weeks ago. And the reason why I was in Africa, in Cape Town to be precise, was because I was helping to run a learning workshop for a bunch of people from across the African continent. So picture this, we're in this beautiful building, this beautiful university in the middle of Cape Town. And we have 30, 35 different people from across Africa who'd all come together to explore this concept of the circular economy. And the aims of that workshop are actually very similar to the aims of the RISE Festival. So it was to redesign, it was to relearn or unlearn, and to explore new ways of thinking by debating, by discussing, and by sometimes disagreeing over the concept of the circular economy and its practical implementation. It was a 4-day workshop, and a key part of that workshop was a project that we set for the participants. So we split the participants into groups. We gave them a question to work on, and it was this project work that they came back to time and time again over those 4 days, and it culminated in a big showpiece event on the last day. That's what we're here to discuss, that project and what it was all about. So to tell us, before we come on to exactly what that project was actually, we're going to listen to 3 guests I have with me who are all participants in that program. So let's hear from them in turn. We'll start by speaking to Ridwana. And Ridwana, if you could just tell us in a few words, why was it you got involved in this program?
Thank you very much, Colin. Hi, everyone. For me, the circular economy presents an entirely new perspective with regards to design. So I am a designer. My specialization is in footwear and apparel. And for me, the challenge had always lain in understanding how do you create products that can create better consumers, which thereby creates better consumption patterns. And for me, the sort of no-brainer was transitioning to the circular economy. I sort of meandered upon the MacArthur Foundation whilst I was doing some research for myself, and I had applied for multiple programs. And I had gone through many of the programs, I think several at least, with EMF, and culminating now in the workshop in Cape Town, I think has just been an absolute sort of superb rounding out of the entire experience.
That's wonderful. Thanks very much, Ridwana. And over to you, Tom. Why did you get involved in the learning program we ran?
All right, thank you, Colin. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. My name is Tom once again, and I come from Uganda. The reason as why I did join the program was to, first of all, network. I really thought I did it to get to know what other people are doing. So I thought it was a very good opportunity to join the workshop and see what other people are doing on the continent. The second reason is working with African Leadership University, which, as some of you may be aware, is running a circular economy research program for which I'm part. So I wanted to know exactly what is being carried out other than what we are doing at African Leadership University. So those are my 2 big reasons. But what I must say is that when I got there, there's so many things I actually got interested in. So now I actually have more reasons as to why I should have participated. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. And our third participant on the call today is Esther. Tell us, Esther, what's your background that took you to that program?
Oh, hi, everyone. So I'm Esther, currently an educator, or in academia, let me say rather. And Inscape had the joy and the pleasure of hosting the From Linear to Circular workshops in Cape Town. And myself and a colleague were able to join in workshops. And I think currently we're really investigating and rambling with how can we incorporate and have circular economy, circular design, circularity be inherent in the courseware and in how we teach our students, what we teach them, the kind of briefs or problems that are set for them to kind of rumble with and resolve. So it was really quite eye-opening, I think, to see the complexity that exists in all the systems. And to see where circular economy is at, and just the opportunities as well that exist. So yeah, so it was really a very eye-opening week, almost a week. Yeah.
Brilliant, Esther. Thank you very much. So, as it said, at the heart of the 4-day workshop was this idea of a project that we split participants into teams and they worked on this project over the course of those 4 days. Ridwana, rather than me explain it, I'd love to hear from you. If you could explain to the audience, like, what was the brief of the project?
Thank you. So the provocation for this particular project was to try and figure out what the duality of the pathways could be when we are talking about Africa 2050. We were asked to project forward and think about what Africa could look like if we were to move towards circular economy, and also, what the alternative might be if we didn't. My group particularly completely kind of bypassed the idea of not moving towards circular. We just wanted to think about a more utopian future. For example, what would it be if in an ideal world, everything moved circular, this is where we would go. But I think what was really interesting about this project was the fact that every group that had to do this particular project interpreted the brief so uniquely. And it was amazing to see everyone else's interpretation, because it all kind of intertwined with what we were thinking. So you would walk around the room and have a look at other people's projects and then think, oof, that kind of makes sense for mine, and mine would make sense here. So it was very interconnected. And I think that with the workshop having ended with the provocation as such, it kind of just cemented the idea in pretty much everyone's heads that this is a necessary pathway.
Sounds like you're doing quite a lot of stealing of other people's ideas there, Ridwana.
Just a little bit.
So yeah, the goal was to imagine futures for the circular economy. Tom, I wonder if you could tell us, like, how did your team go about tackling the project brief?
Right. So we used a scenario-based sort of planning approach to answer the provocation that was given to us. So as a group, we thought of ourselves, what exactly do we want to see in 2050 regarding circularity? So what we did was each of us came up with a couple of ideas, and we started debating about those ideas to see which ones would best represent our group. So eventually we came up with 2 ideas, which were categorized as one to be a likely future, which is inevitable, whether we like it or not, at some point it's going to happen. Then some other one, which is what we desired. So the one that we thought is a likely future is the one on education. And the goal is basically that by 2050, at least 30 African countries have incorporated circular economy in their education curriculum. And this is a likely change. Then the second one, which is more of what we desire, is to establish a circular economy rating at African Union level to encompass, rather to compel investors, both new and old, to include circularity approaches in their research and design. So those are the 2 scenarios we looked at, and I'm very happy to share with the team as we go along.
So that was at least 30 countries to have implemented circular economy in their education programs.
Yes, please.
And when you said that education programs, you mean at school level or beyond?
Yeah, so we looked at education and we thought university would be a very good entry point, but eventually it should be able to trickle down to lower levels of education, including primary school.
I see. Okay, and that was like your lowercase future, like not quite worst case scenario, but a minimal scenario. Could you just remind us again what the higher level scenario was?
Yeah, so the higher level one was to have a circular economy rating for at the African Union level. So we have the African Union coming up with a rating similar to what we see as the Dow Jones Sustainability Index to help compel the different investors. You may be aware that Africa has one of the fastest number of startups that are coming up. So we thought it would be important to push all those startups to think in a circular manner. And we thought that's where this goal should be able to take us.
Okay, lovely. Thanks very much, Tom. Esther, over to you. Like, how did your team go about tackling the brief you were given?
So I think we kind of, it's a very, I don't know what the word might be. And I don't know, we kept thinking how likely would it be that this would happen. But I think if anything COVID has taught us is that anything could happen. So looking at, Africa as a continent, and having these two scenarios where you have this, we called it the mosaic scenario, where the borders exist, but we as different countries rely and make use of our strengths and of whether it's oil or agriculture or whatever it might be, we work on those two. And the other scenario was a Wakanda scenario, which we spent quite a lot of time in, and we found that to be a bit more of a resilient system, in the sense that if for instance there's an integrated infrastructure development that happens between all the different countries. So in the Wakanda scenario, the borders don't exist. There's the free trade, people can move and labor can, we're sharing and pooling all our resources. But something like this, we imagined would need to have a really drastic, sort of catastrophic event, so to say, that would happen, a war, a pandemic, or natural disaster that really just equals the playing field for all the African countries, and really just breaks down all the different silos that we may currently have. And the system definitely we felt had more resilience built into it. So for instance, sorry, I'll go back to, having that integrated infrastructure development would mean there's more renewable energies, there's improved circular manufacturing, the supply chain becomes more resilient because you're not working with just one country's infrastructure or resources or whatever it may be. You're able to pull from the different countries. If 1 year, one country's, lemons are doing fantastic, another country's cotton or whatever it might be doing, we can rely on those and rather work together, and building a hub, for instance, of data that allows for all this information to be shared. So it really calls on the African countries to share the information, for them to be able to share resources, for those borders to exist but not exist solidly, especially when you're considering economic and infrastructure and and pooling of resources. So in short, those were the sort of two scenarios that we looked at. The mosaic has a bit more limitation. It's more centered in what currently is, and the Wakanda kind of looks at, okay, 2050, something drastic has happened. How can we build more resilience? How can circular economy bolster and be a part and drive this resilience forward?
Right, so are you saying and this is your team's work, or final presentation here we can see, of course. Are you saying the Wakanda scenario on the left-hand side was driven out of disaster and led to like a more complex network of relationships?
So I think it's quite tricky when we consider different nations, because there's a sort of, I guess, national pride, or you've got different strengths, let's call them, or politically, whatever it might be, motivated. We felt that it would be a natural or some kind of disaster that would really drive this to happen, because currently people, nations are still quite silo and not willing, I guess, to kind of go down the full road. I think in some countries or certain regions they may have, but not as a continent.
What? Why? I'm going to move over to Ridwana actually to bring her into this. Ridwana, I don't think you've told us about your team's project before we move on. Why don't you tell us a bit about the work you did? And I'm afraid we've only got this badly blurred picture here.
So our team decided to be practical about wanting to just kind of work on two select futures that we wanted to see in 2050. So we chose food security as one, and we chose housing and urbanization as the other. And we kind of built out a scenario in terms of what the problem was, who the players were around it, or sort of what the levers would be in order to actually get that problem sorted out. And lastly, who the players were that could make that problem either go away or legislate or develop policy in order to actually help us get to a solution toward that problem faster. So I think it was interesting in terms of, for example, the urbanization side, because when we look at trends, for instance, we know that by 2050, for example, 1 in 3 people will be a young African. So that means that we're going to have this ginormous influx of people into urban spaces. And I mean, this is what this festival is all about, is how are we going to accommodate people in these urban spaces, with sort of an understanding that we need to create our cities in a better way to encourage these people to live better lives here. What I think is just an observation that kind of tied our presentation with many other presentations was the call for circular economy knowledge to be implemented at all scales. So for our side, we had said that it needs to actually be implemented in curriculum sort of from an ECD phase moving forward. But obviously it makes a whole lot more sense to have it, like Tom mentioned, at a university level and then work your way down. But the overall idea is that we do need a whole lot more education around circular economy. And I think that was what was cohesive around everyone's presentations. I think what's also interesting to note is, and this was one of the other group mates, Leanne, who had mentioned that we are concentrating, for example, on this 2050 picture, and that's amazing and that's great. But what about post-2050? What do we do post-2050? And I thought that that was a really interesting provocation for obviously a whole other workshop. But it would be interesting to note that the world's not going to end at 2050, and we do need to think post that. So I found that to be fabulously interesting. And yeah, I think that food security was we sort of thought about that because, based on the site visits, for example, that we had to Inseco, et cetera, just got everyone thinking about food security, got thinking about, what exactly is the carbon footprint of the meat that you're eating. And Africa is very meat heavy. Here in South Africa alone, our meat consumption is insane. So how do we picture a free and fair and equitable society for people, and what alternatives do we have? So yeah, that was our bit.
And did you have any answers to that question about the meat problem, as you were suggesting?
So we, one of the case studies that we'd had to discuss was the 1 acre farm, it's such a fabulous idea. And we have space that if that's anything that we have in South Africa, we have arable land and we have loads of it. One of the sort of utopian thinking ideas that we had was that if government were to be able to actually hand out land to people who qualify as farmers, if we were to be able to, have agricultural colleges not have that many barriers to entry, we could allow people to grow more food for themselves and for others too. But also looking at farming in urban spaces and what that looks like. So we were talking about alternative farming like aeroponics and hydroponics and that sort of thing, and how that can actually enable people within cities to, I guess, survive independently. Should, for example, another terrible case scenario like another COVID happen and you were to lock down cities, people would be able to be self-sufficient because they literally have these it sounds very contrary, but interconnected silos of food supply.
Yeah, the 1 acre farm example, I posted a link there. It's a fascinating one. And one of the things that's really fascinating about it, what lives up to its name, is a small piece of land in which Emma Nalayuma, who's the farmer, managed to extract so much value and so many crops from that piece of land. Tom, I'm going to come back to you. I haven't heard from you in a while, and I know your background experiences in urban planning, amongst other things. And I just wondered, picking up on Ridwana's point there, about instigating a sort of farming culture within urban environments and using the space well, is Is that something that your team looked at in any way?
Yeah, we did think about it. And, our focus was more into education, and education sort of encompasses all those things. What we want to do is have circularity embedded in the different courses the students study. For example, if someone is in agriculture, they shouldn't be looking at farming at a large scale. You could do what they call urban farming. In Uganda here, we have what we call vertical and micro gardening. You have someone with a very small piece of land or just a corridor, and they're growing food vertically, and they're able to feed themselves. So that's something we need to think of. So as urban planners, that is something they need to consider. You create space, very little space that these people can be able to exploit to do things like farming and as well as having a healthy life. So that's something we considered.
Gotcha. Yeah. To go back to the point about education, a couple of you have raised, let's put a question out to the audience here, because we've had this conversation about embedding circular economy into our education system. I just wonder what our audience thinks about where the starting point for that should be. Do we start at a very young age, or do we go straight into higher education and work your way down from there? As I think you'd put it, Ridwana. Keen to know what people's thoughts on that are. We have our opinion at Ellen MacArthur Foundation about how we go about that as well. So tell us in the chat window, do you start in primary or do you start in higher education? Esther, back to your team. What was it like working then in a team of, you had 4 people in your team? How was that process of putting together your vision for a future of the circular economy in Africa?
So Colin, we had Dr. Sugilo from Inscape, Matthew Howard from ICLEA, and then Salim as well. It was really quite engaging because Dr. Sue and I are from a more educational background, where Salim's more business, also education, and Matthew, I guess, is straddling a bit of education or, in the professional field. And I initially thought we would have landed up with a very much, education-centric solution. But the provocation, as Ridwana calls it, really pushed you to think beyond what you're comfortable with, what area and your zone of comfortability, and to really go beyond that kind of thinking. I must say, and it's something Dr. Susan also brought up quite a number of times, and it's come up in our conversations, is that the circular economy really calls for a multidisciplinary approach in how we come up with solutions and how we engage with other people, because none of us are specialists in all of these things. So, and it's okay to call a Ridwana and be like, okay, I'm trying to grapple with this. How are you going about it? What case studies have you come through? So building those networks as well within the circular economy and being able to call on those people. So I think when we looked at this, it was challenging for us, but having a more of a multidisciplinary approach and groups working on these provocations was really quite beneficial, because it opened your eyes not only to, the silo of whatever specialist or discipline that you are in, but it really forced you to look out and beyond. Yeah.
And of course, that can make some people quite uncomfortable too, can't it? Facing up to their lack of expertise in certain areas. But a successful forest doesn't just consist of pine trees, if one wants to use a forest metaphor. Ridwana, what type of skills mix did you have in your group, and how was that beneficial to you thinking about the future of a circular economy?
So we had someone interested in EV, and that was a startup that they were building. And we had someone who was kind of like a jack of all trades as well. And we had an investment banker as well. So that was an interesting mix, I think, because we got to kind of see the problem from all sides. And I think that having someone, with a background in investment banking was interesting, because it kind of shone a light on where the roadblocks are in terms of what is stopping funding for circular economy initiatives. It sounds so hot right now that there is money for everything green, But the truth is that a lot of the solutions out there aren't always scalable, and they're not always exciting to investors who are, at the end of the day, just out there to make money. So I think that putting together a whole bunch of professionals from various different backgrounds shouldn't only be an exercise that is left to workshopping. I feel that this should be the approach that companies should take as well. And even government should take these kind of approaches as well, because if you're constantly looking at a problem using the same lens you always have, you can't change the outcome of that particular problem. Someone in the chat from the European Environmental Bureau had a really important point, I think, about speaking, just going back to your education thing, about education towards policymakers. And I have sat through 100,000 different webinars with very, very bored governmental officials just sitting there going, like having absolutely zero interest. And you can't exactly fault them in not having an interest in something like this when, for example, their job is doing X. So if you were to be able to implement these people into a sort of consultancy service or a consultancy session that they have, you get all of these fantastic ideas coming through, and it's up to them to then implement. So yeah, I think that that's a very good point that this person has made.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And I guess there is an area where people can get frustrated about not seeing action straight away. And I think some people would say the wheels of government can turn quite slowly. There are some examples of great successes in some cities and in some nations of implementing a circular economy, or some extent of a circular economy policies. But the battle goes on and the work goes on. Great to see lots of comments coming in to the chat window. Thanks for all of that. Dorkane making the point that is just as important to educate policymakers and business professionals as it is educators, I guess is what you're saying. And yeah, of course, I think I agree with Patricia. I'm sure we all could, that the education should work at all levels so that people understand what a circular economy is, so that that next generation of policymakers and business leaders and so on instinctively understand what a circular economy is and what value it brings. But Tom, Rise, someone's put you on the spot with a question in the chat window there. Do you have any ideas or suggestions about how urban planners can include vertical and micro gardening from city scale to neighbourhood scale in plans and processes and get this implemented?
Yeah, that's something I'm going to talk about. But before I could go there, I wanted to speak to the point of educating policymakers. I think that was a very crucial point. My view on that is that, in policy making, my experience in government is that we should have fast movers and slow movers. So the idea is you need to get a few of those fast movers, get them interested. Then these could, in a way, start, driving the agenda towards where you want it. Otherwise, you cannot get everybody, like Ridwan has just mentioned. You can't have everybody moving at the same pace, getting these guys, putting them in a room, teaching them. You won't get the results. Get a few people that are interested, share with them the ideas, and see how those can influence. To go back to the issue of how urban planners could do this, urban planners usually work together with city councils, with municipal councils, as well as national government to come up with these nice plans. But some of these plans are usually more, sometimes we call it dry planning. You just have house after house after house. And these houses, the approximate area you have to them is basically a road. But what we could do as urban planners, maybe as we think of planning, we should create small spaces. And these should be designated spaces that we're going to call small gardens, that these people could now exploit. I mean, this is an area we could still look at. This is an area we could study. I'm not very well versed with urban planning together with vertical micro gardening. I was just sharing an experience, and I'm very happy to listen to any ideas that would come from the team.
Thanks, Tom. Someone recently recommended a book to me. It's called A, B, C, and D, and it's written by Ken Webster and Craig Johnson, both formerly of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, who look at the twin issues, actually, the hot topics here just now, of both education and investing in agriculture within our cities, or urban gardening and such like. So that's called A, B, C, and D. Maybe something for you to look out for. So more comments coming in about education and how things could work. What I would like to pick up on now, though, is as we're sort of moving towards the end of the conversation, is talking a little bit more about the other things we did in the week and what value it brought to you. And Esther, I'll come to you first. When you think about the things we did over the 4 days of the workshop, what stands out for you as a useful learning experience?
I would have to say a number of the site visits that we did do, I was able to go and listen to Vernon Collis, which felt very much like a conversation, and it was a really wonderful winter morning or autumn morning in Cape Town, and just having those conversations about systems, about circular economy, and seeing how that's happening in the built environment was really, it was encouraging, because I think the built environment is quite guilty of build, demolish, build, demolish. We don't necessarily stop to think of the effect that construction might have. I think there are people, but there's a broader sense that we need to have more awareness of our impact. And I think something I'd shared with the group on our last day is him saying that whatever you do or wherever you go, leave the world or leave that situation, leave that place better than you found it. And that's his, basically his purpose in everything that he does. And I think that's such a simplified way of looking at it, but it really is quite impactful, and something that, even a grade 1 student could understand and could apply to their life or to how they do things. He also spoke about, building complexity, not making things complicated. So when we're doing circular economy and circularity and circular design, we shouldn't look for complicated things, but rather build complexity so that there's resilience, so that there is, that the systems and the thinking that we apply is a bit more sustainable. And that culture of take will really be something that we need to challenge as a society. So that was really, really quite encouraging to be able to go see Vernon, and also, so the site visits were really, it was a great way to be able to see things in action that we have been, case studies we've been reading about, or stories, we might have heard, but just to see and to really speak to people one-on-one and hear what are their challenges when trying to apply the principles or really go at doing things in a more circular way.
Yeah, and I think that I love talking about the concept of a circular economy. I think more than anything else. But speaking to people who are actually implementing exciting ideas, working in that field, and seeing businesses operate. We saw, now what were they called? Rewoven.
Yes.
As part of that same visit, who are doing interesting things with waste textile fabrics. It really takes things to the next level, doesn't it? When you see businesses who are actually doing it and getting success with it.
Yeah, 100%. And I think something Rewoven did speak about, the gentleman from Rewoven, was sustainability, and how 60 sustainability sells, and now we got to think. People are trying to package it in a certain way, or circular economy may not look as sexy as whatever it might be, and it's quite unfortunate. But we really do need to consider how we package, how we sell, who we involve in the workshops, in the talks, in the conversations. Because I think going into the workshop, I was quite overwhelmed about how are we going to do this? But walking away, I realized it's just that one step at a time, or starting with whatever I can do. Because in my little bit of doing what I can, there are 30 plus other people who are at the workshop also doing their bit in their own communities, in their own cities. So it grows as it goes, and as the more people hear about it, you can't unhear. Once you've heard about the circular economy, you can't unhear it. And it's something that really sits with you, and you really have to contemplate on a personal level, but also on a society level, and your impact to society.
Thanks, Esther. And Ridwana, we see you on screen here. That idea that we're all doing our little part definitely is useful, but surely it's being able to support each other and understanding that those other people are there, and who you can send an email to or call up at some point that really helps too. Could you talk a little bit about the value of networking and the way we did in that workshop, and of course the way that's going on just now in this festival?
I think that we do not give enough credence to networking as we should. It's amazing to say that I have this ginormous network, but you don't actually use the network in the way you're supposed to. I find that a lot of times people actually just harvest people on LinkedIn, and they say, well, I'm connected with this person and I'm connected with this person. But if you don't actually make use of those networks in a way that makes sense to what you're trying to build, or what you're trying to do, or where you'd like to go, it doesn't make sense how many people you're connected with. I find that within circular, so this was, pre Ellen MacArthur Foundation days, it was really hard for me to reach out to people who were in CE, because it felt so far away, and it felt so, I guess, out of reach for what I was trying to ask them for, or what advice I needed. Having been a part of the EMF for a while now, and having been a part of this workshop, now just means that I have a bunch of really accessible people to connect with, and whom I have connected with. And for me, because circular economy it's new in so many senses. There aren't even actual real accredited courses, for example, that can turn you into a circular economy specialist, whatever that is. Getting information, getting input from everyone else can help you to be able to build better, to design better, to think better. So, if you have the opportunity to get into a network as such, I would really say go for it. Esther, to your point about being so overwhelmed and where to start, I feel like that every day when it comes to sustainability and circular economy. But honestly, what I do with my clients is I say to them, one tiny step by 8 billion people. It's 8 billion tiny steps. That is a huge action. So, if we're all doing something, we're all doing our bit, I think that maybe we can get somewhere a little bit faster. But yeah, so for me, I think the value in the networking sessions, the value in the entire workshop was definitely just growing my knowledge base, and growing the base of people that I know whose knowledge I can tap into, because there's so much I don't know.
Thanks, Ridwana. Tom, final words from you. Just briefly, what are you going to do next as a result of having been at the workshop?
The first thing is to do what she's told me, not to just have all these people connected to me via LinkedIn, but reach out, especially when I really feel I need the help. That's very important. Then I think I'm going to try to apply, because some of us come from disciplines where you usually do big things. It's never you doing the actual things. For example, I wouldn't have a micro garden myself, but from the way people have always explained it, it's something we could do. And I mean, it should be
I think we've lost Tom there. Okay, great. Folks, I think we've lost Tom, unfortunately. So thank you very much, Tom, Esther, and Ridwana, for being a part of this conversation. And thank you to the Rise Festival for having a home for us. If you go to the Rise Festival website, you can see there's a whole host of different sessions taking part today. It's a very busy schedule, and very soon they're going to have any sessions you've missed will be appearing on their YouTube channel. And as you can see being posted in the chat there, lots of links to various sessions that you can join. If you like what you've heard about the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's program From Linear to Circular, then I've posted a link into the chat window there too, where you can register your interest to be part of our next one. And that will happen in October, somewhere in Africa. So follow that link and you can join in. So folks, thank you very much for being a part of this, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.